Another day, another Caro Kann on the climb to 2000 ELO. My name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1500 to 2000 ELO in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process oh my god, as best as I can for your education and entertainment. Here we have a Tartakower. Any good YouTuber would have cut that out and re-recorded the intro, by the way, but we don't edit over here. Okay, so take. We'll play knight to f6. My opponent may go for the alien gambit with knight to g5, which would be very interesting. But okay, he goes for the main line with knight f6 and ef6, which begins the Tartakower. Now, this is quite a common system that you will get. Knight f3 is not the best move, though. It looks like the most natural move, but it's hopefully I can demonstrate why it's not the best. The issue is, for white, that this knight belongs on e2, because either it wants to support the f4 square, or it wants to come to g3 and f5 to invade our position. The problem with the knight on f3 is that we're going to play bishop g4, and there's no real good way of breaking the pin. Now, my opponent may be trying to castle queenside, so that if I go bishop g4, you know, if I am inclined to take and double the pawns at some point, well, then he gets an open g-file for his rook, which would be probably good compensation. But I, of course, am not forced to take if white castles queenside. So maybe he plays something like c3, which is very common. Let's say rook e8, or even queen d2, yeah. So if I take, I assume his plan is to castle queenside and go, oh, thank you very much for giving me an open g-file to work with, right? So we do have to be kind of careful here. But the knight on f3, even if we can't necessarily take it, it isn't a particularly good piece in a lot of cases, because if we drop our bishop back to e6 at some point, let's say, to target a2, the knight doesn't really have any good forward movement, because our f-pawn, although it's doubled, it does control the knight's movement very nicely, which is a common theme in lots of positions where the pawn is like 2 squares or 3 squares, however you want to see it, away from the knight. It can stop its forward movement quite nicely. Now, maybe it can come to h4 and into f5, potentially, but there's a lot of caveats to that. So, okay, how do we want to handle this? Well, rook e8 looks reasonable. It's always kind of a good move in these positions. I think knight to a6 is a move as well, to be fair. And I may play it. It looks a bit silly, but I don't think taking is very good for white. Because if he castles queenside, he's lost his best attacker, and he's also given us an open b-file. I think it's a good move. And if he does castle queenside, I believe we can play knight to b4, targeting the bishop and the hanging a2 pawn. So we go c3 to stop knight to b4, which makes sense. I think queen a5 is a move here. Now the queen is disconnected from a5 because of the c-pawn, targeting a2 and discouraging white from castling queenside. Because if white castles kingside, then, I mean, this is most likely going to be an issue for him. If his king is on g1. But if his king is over here, then, I mean, he could probably just use the g-file for attacking purposes. I think the knight often comes to c7 and into d5, which can be a nice maneuver. But if we go knight c7 and castles queenside, I don't know, I'm not convinced. So I think I'd rather play queen a5 here. And these positions, I often used to find quite difficult when white kind of puts the knight on f3, which is normally not a great thing to do. But then just goes, okay, if you want to take it, you can take it. I'm going to try and castle queenside and just slaughter you on the king side. I've actually got some like nice positions out of games like that, but ended up losing anyway because I've just struggled so much with the pressure. And I remember I actually had an over-the-board rapid game against I think he was about 2250, and a kind of a similar thing happened, and I ended up going up a pawn, actually, if I remember correctly, and the position was absolutely fine for me. I was like it was like -1 or so in my favor, but I just got into time trouble and the attack just got a bit overwhelming and I crumbled. But it is difficult for humans to manage the positions in the Tartakower where white does castle queenside and just tries to go with the pawns on the king side, which is why I like to try to discourage white from castling queenside with these moves like knight to a6 trying to come into b4 and queen a5 targeting a2. Often bishop e6 is a good way to target the a2 pawn, but since I've already put it on g4, I didn't want to bring it back because that feels like a waste of tempo. So bishop e2 feels like quite a concession to, you know, develop the bishop to d3 and then bring it back to e2. To me, this indicates that white wants to revert plans and castle kingside, but he doesn't want his structure to be ruined, so he wants the ability to take with a bishop. So I think just rook e8. And I can probably say that this is an opening success. We are fully developed. We are developing quicker than white is here, which obviously, being the black pieces and being half a tempo down at the start, and playing the Caro Kann, where you play quite a few pawn moves, is definitely good going. So, okay, castle's kingside. Now, how do we want to continue? Well, knight c7 looks very natural. I think b4 we can meet with either queen to a3 or queen to h5, although maybe h3 is annoying. Yeah, although queen to f5 could be interesting. And if knight h4, then queen to h5. Looks quite nice. So I think I'm going to go knight c7. Often the queen comes to c7 to get on this diagonal, which can be quite fruitful. Even if white goes h3, so that this isn't a weak pawn, which typically white does, and he may do right now. It still can be quite a good diagonal for the queen and bishop to form a battery on. And if I get the chance to play knight d5, I may well play queen c7 if given the opportunity, because we exert control over important squares like f4, and maybe we can play a move like knight to f4. Okay, a3 is interesting. I don't see a reason not to play knight d5. c4 looks wrong. b4, really? Really? Well, I'm very happy with this position. This feels great. Okay, h3. So I assume bishop h5? Right? There seems to be no reason to bring the bishop to f5. Now, one of the important things in the Tartakower that I have learned over time as well is typically black should not be pushing pawns on the queen side. Although it often feels natural to challenge white's approaching majority. Obviously, white has a 4-on-3, so he could, let's say he was able to play c4 and d5, he could potentially form a passed pawn after take-take. I have found that it's much better to leave our pawns in this formation most of the time, because then it takes white much longer to get his pawns further up the board in order to facilitate a trade. Whereas if we push our pawns up, it's easier for white to trade the pawns off and give himself a passed pawn more quickly. Now, obviously, we have a 4-on-3 on the king side, but it's not as good because we have doubled pawns, which is harder to break through with. So, okay, rook e1. f5 looks interesting, trying to play f4 and trap the bishop. Also, ooh, c3 is weak. If f5 and c4, challenging my knight, take is interesting. However, I think if here, knight to f6 is actually better, trying to come into e4 with some nice targets. So this does look like a very nice move, and I think I should play it. By the way, when the bishop is on e3, it's very common to try and play this f5, f4 idea. Now, you do have to be a little bit cautious with it, because you will be blocking off this diagonal for your bishop and your queen. Nearly always, the dark squared bishop comes to d6, so even if the queen is on a different square, f4 will block the bishop's scope. But you will, with a pawn on f4, be exerting control over some squares deep in the white territory. So it's kind of the trade-off, like, which would you rather have? And the bishop the bishop on d6 can still be very good, even if there is a pawn on f4, because the pawn on f4, like, for example, the bishop currently controls g3, but theoretically, white could play g3. Now, he can't right now, because I'd probably sack the bishop and take with the queen. But theoretically, g3 could be played, whereas if a pawn is on f4, g3 can never be played, because he can't allow this capture to open up his king's position. So the pawn kind of exerts more authority over the squares that it controls than the bishop does, if that makes sense, because the pawn is of lower value than the bishop. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And hopefully for all my Caro Kann players, this is a very instructive video so far. And I know a lot of you will find yourselves having already struggled or currently struggling with these Tartakower positions where white intends to castle queenside. So hopefully this sort of approach of not letting white castle queenside and heavily discouraging white from castling kingside is very useful, because in the past, I used to just play basic moves like knight d7 and queen c7 and kind of let white do what he wants, and then white would castle queenside and throw the pawns at me, and I'd be like, oh my god, I'm completely lost, and I'd panic. Think more critically about the position is what I'd say. If you don't want white to castle queenside, try and stop him. Sometimes you won't be able to, but you can at least discourage it as much as possible and perhaps get some concessions out of white if he is going to castle queenside. Okay, queen c1. Interesting. So he intends to meet f4 with bishop d2, and then probably try to play for c4, I guess. Interesting. Okay, how can we deal with this? Well, take. Take f4, maybe? Is interesting, trying to open up the position. Let's say bishop d3, opening up the rook's defense. We'll then just take bishop f4, rook e8 check, rook takes, queen's under attack, let's say queen f1. I don't know, this looks pretty good to me. Bishop g3. White's position looks horrific. Okay, that looks nice. Take, f4. Of course, if e4, we just take with the rook. If take, that looks pretty abysmal. Same thing with bishop to g3 is going to happen, and that's with tempo on the queen. If f4 immediately, I feel like I'm just closing the position, and that's actually in white's favor, because then he can focus on the queen side. So I think it makes sense to take and then play f4, because as I mentioned before, white has a majority on the queen side, right? 4 versus 3. If I can trade these pawns, then my 3 versus 2 majority is actually usable in the future, right? In like some kind of endgame situation, my 3v2 is actually mobile because their f-pawns are not doubled, and e4 is very interesting because why can't I just take that? Bishop to d3, I guess. But I mean, maybe I have this, maybe not immediately, but bishop d3, something like take. Maybe he's going for an opposite colored bishop position and thinks he can hold that. Maybe that's the plan. Interesting. Interesting. So I've got to be slightly careful. So we're up a pawn. So after take, we can't play rook to e8 because the rook is undefended. We could consider bringing the rook back. We could consider that. Or maybe to e7 to prepare rook a to e8, and if take, we can take with the queen. And if queen e1, we can play rook e8. That looks quite nice. Knight g5 can always be met with bishop g6. That's not a problem. I think rook e7 is the way to go. And rook e7, I think it's a good move, but it's one of those moves that's very difficult to play, because it's like, when there's two rooks on the same file staring at each other, often the high-level move is not to capture, but to actually move the rook to a different square on the same file, where if a trade were to occur, then it would be beneficial to you. So if I were to take here, that would be beneficial to white, because white then gains access to e1 with the queen, which not only means white dominates the e file for the time being, but also has access to squares like h4, which could be annoying, right? So by playing rook e7, I don't allow white's queen access to h4, because the queen is still on c1, and I also prepare to take back with the queen if white's rook takes, which means that I'm the only one on the e file, rather than white having the queen on e1 and being the only one on the e file, and maybe forcing me to play queen e7 for a trade. Whereas if take and then queen e1, I'm one step ahead. I can then play rook e8 and make white choose. He still doesn't have access to h4 unless he wants to trade the queens, which I'd probably be happy with, because I'm up a pawn. And also, this 4 versus 2 could definitely break through. Although the f-pawn is doubled, I'm up 2 pawns on that side of the board. And because my pawns on the queen side are kept very far back, it's difficult for white to break through the position. Because even if he executes c4, d5, and even if he gets a trade here, although I would probably play c5 in those cases, this d-pawn still has a long way to go, and it's blockaded on d6 nicely by the bishop, which is also quite a common theme in the Tartakower in lots of late middle games and end games. So, okay, let's see how white handles this. And white's position is very restricted. Like, if I, for example, get to play rook a to e8, then I will most likely want to play a move like rook e6. Sorry, rook e3. Hitting the knight, the bishop, the pawn, putting pressure on the rook, and if something like take, well, I could take with the rook, of course, but if I take with the pawn, well then, something like bishop g3 could be very strong, or even trying to push the pawn through. Like, there's a lot going on. I think that keeping pieces on the board, although we're up a pawn, and typically trading would be the best thing, keeping pieces on the board for the time being, I think, is the way to go, because if we are going to trade, I want it to be on my terms. So, for example, if we trade this pair of rooks on the e-file, I am not going to take on e1 if it means his queen can come to e1 and cause problems for my position, right? I want him to take me on e7 so I can take back with my queen, and I can cause problems for him on the e-file. And double up with like rook e7, queen e7, and something like rook e8 after white makes their next move, right? I also have the bishop pair, which should be an advantage. I do have the option of taking this knight in a lot of cases. Okay, yeah, he does take. And my bishop is restricting the queen very nicely. Queen f1. Interesting. So if rook a to e8... Well, no, sorry, rook e8, rook e1. If I take, then knight takes, right? So that's interesting. So I could start by taking the knight, but then I get into an opposite colour bishop position, and I'm not sure if I can win that. So queen f1 is quite a nice move. Quite a nice move. Now, if I go rook e8 and he goes rook e1, I could play like queen d7. And if he takes, then I'll take with the queen. Interesting. I could give a check. Could give a check. Does that change anything? Taking to h1. Rook e8, rook e1. I don't think anything changes. If take, then take, and that's a problem. Good move from my opponent. I feel like I still have to take the e-file, though. Here. His queen is still quite restricted. It doesn't really have any good squares to go to. So I think this is still the way to go. And let's say rook e1 and queen d7, which I think I'll play, just to put pressure on h3, which could be useful. Also, I can stop back rank mates with bishop f8 if necessary. I'm potentially preparing rook to e3 here. Okay, he trades. Interesting. Wow, he wants to trade everything. Really? Okay. Again, this is one of those situations where I'm not sure taking is the best move for us, because then we seem to trade on white's terms. So the other moves I'm considering, firstly, is queen e3 check. If take, is it beneficial for me to get the passed e-pawn? Maybe it's just a weakness, though. So the other move is king to f8, so that if I take with the king and get my king involved in the game quickly. And if something like bishop h7, then we have a kind of classic Bobby Fischer trap, like take, g6, h4, king f8, h5, king g7, take, and the bishop is trapped. I think Fischer played that in game 2 of his World Championship match against Spassky. On the other side of the board, I think it was, but same kind of thing. So I think king f8, it makes a lot of sense. And then the white queen still can't infiltrate on any squares. Now, what if white plays a move like king f2 and just says, okay, what are you going to do? Don't know, it's difficult. So maybe I should play take and something like bishop 2 g6. Or maybe h6 preparing g5 to secure the f-pawn. And then something like bishop g6. Because if the light squared bishops get traded, it should be good for black, because bishop versus knight should be beneficial for us with pawns on both sides of the board. And of course, we're up a pawn. What we don't want to do is trade, let's say take. That's probably a draw because we have opposite colored bishops. So we've got to be careful. The more I'm looking at it, though, the more I'm thinking I should trade the queens. Should I throw this in first? Here. Well, then he can take with the king, which feels good for him. So I'm actually going to take. I'm going to go against what I said before. I'm also thinking I want to play g5 to secure the f-pawn. If take, I can take his bishop. So I can actually play it straight away. Should I support it with f6 first? Well, no, then h4. If g5, h4. g4, knight h2. f3, take. Bishop f1. I don't think that's good for us. g5, h4. Maybe just h6 and f6. Just securing the pawn, and then I can bring my king to the game in some manner. That makes sense. Putting everything on the dart squares also seems to make sense, because only one of his pieces can target the dart squares, being the knight, of course. And if this knight comes into like e5, I, of course, snap it off, because I should win that endgame. Maybe I should just start with f6. I don't know. No, because if f6, h4, and g5, I don't think this trade is good, because maybe e5 is a problem, so I want the f6 pawn stopping that. So g5. King f2. f6. Yeah, that makes sense. Because now this obviously is a threat, because the bishop is now defended. I just want to play h6, basically. Secure my extra pawn. I do have this 4-on-3, which at some point I can use to attack. And try to create a passed pawn. Of course, with the pawns being doubled, it's slightly more difficult. Okay, but now I have bishop f7, no? That feels wrong. Because the trade of bishops... Yeah, no, this has to be winning. This has to be winning. Here? Well, no, if here I can just bring my bishop back, though, and I can dominate the knight's movement. So that's not a problem. And if here, then here. white can't ever trade the last set of minor pieces, because the king and pawn endgame should be a relatively easy win, I think. Because it's still going to take him time to create a passed pawn on the queen side. h5 looks natural. Stopping king to g4. I think I want to bring my king to d5 to stop this knight from moving, because then I'll go king c4, and to stop c4, because then I'll take this. If king to e4, probably f5 check. Kicking the king away here, but then I suppose c4 is playable because the king defends this. So maybe f5 was better. I thought that might give him access to e5, but I suppose if bishop c7, then no. Okay, yeah, so now I go bishop to e7. To me, that feels like an incredibly easy move to play, because the point is that our bishop dominates the movement of the knight. All of the knight's forward movement is controlled by my bishop. Yeah, c4, that makes sense. F5, knight back. Well, that would hang. I should probably try and create a passed pawn ASAP. If here I just snap the knight, I think bishop d6 makes a lot of sense. Preemptively defending the pawn so that g4 can be played. Maybe a5 should be considered as well, but don't know. Maybe not yet. I feel like I should have played f5 rather than h5 before, but ooh, c5 feels completely wrong. No, this feels completely wrong to me. Because, one, he's just locked his pawns on dart squares, which are vulnerable to my bishop. It does restrict my bishop's movement, sure, to an extent, though. It also stops a move like knight to e2, to try to reroute the knight, or maybe put pressure on f4, because then you allow king to d5, and I'm just infiltrating. So I think c5 has just made white's life much more difficult. I mean, white's probably lost no matter what. Maybe there are ways to hold, but they're just super hard to actually play as a human. It might involve just doing nothing, but there only being like one way to do it properly. I'm sure we'll check. Well, we'll check it with the engine after and see what it has to say. Okay, a4. Okay, what about g4? This looks very natural. And now I don't really have to worry about knight e2 going after this, because I can always infiltrate. And again, this is showing with my pawns staying where they were from move 1. My first move was c6, obviously. So the pawns haven't changed on the queen side since move 1. These three pawns. We're on move 36 right now. So I've kept them as far back as I feasibly can, so that white's majority can't be felt. Oh no, that's completely wrong, surely. Oh, well, I suppose if take then here. Is that good, though? Because then f3 take g3. And how are you stopping that pawn? I think I can sack the pawn. Yeah. Because I was thinking, okay, I could take with the h-pawn to stop king to e4. Yeah, so he does go back, because, yeah, I think coming forward f3 and it's game over. Okay. h4, h3. Is this a problem? Should I play king f5 and allow d5? Maybe bishop to d8, preparing bishop to f6 is a problem for white. If bishop d8 and knight to e4, then I can go king to d5, and there's no knight to f6 check picking up the h5 pawn, because my bishop controls that square. That looks pretty nice. I basically am just trying to stop white's counterplay, because while this looks very natural, I don't really want to allow white to break through. I want to keep my king protecting that. And now bishop to f6. The king, of course, can't come to e3. The knight can go to e2 to defend, but then white gives up some ground, is my reasoning. Also, I think I can give this check first to force the king back. And then f3 looks interesting. But maybe maybe splitting up the pawns isn't the best thing to do. So if bishop to g5, preparing king to d5, this is now not under attack, so white could move the knight. Bishop f6, knight here. Ah, but then king here. Yeah, yeah. And he could create a passed pawn, but my bishop can always get back to defend, so that should be fine. I go here straight away. No, I don't think so. I don't know. Here, take, here, take, bishop c7. That should be winning. Here, defending c7. a6, c7, take. I think I can not play a6 and just go d4 or something, or maybe h5, h3. The knight probably can't stop. It's not simple, though. I want to win more simply. Maybe d5 is the simple win. No. Well, here. That feels more complicated. What about f3? Take. Knight c3. Bishop f6. Then there's no d5. And there's no good way to defend this. And even if I lose my f-pawn, if I win the d-pawn, I'll probably win the c-pawn. Okay. I don't know. f3 feels wrong because I'm splitting the pawns up, and I'm also giving the white king an easy path to win the f-pawn, and I can't really defend it very easily. But it feels like it's the easiest way to cut out white's potential counterplay. Although I'm just realizing that after take, I'm allowing this. Here. Should I be doing that? They don't have access to d5. Oh, maybe that was idiotic. Knights are tricky, man. Knights are tricky. Maybe bishop g5 or even bishop g3 was the way to go. Don't know. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have allowed that. Okay, here. I'm trying to find a way to trap the knight on the edge of the board, but I can't figure it out. Here. Because the knight has this square to come to. But if I move my king, then he has this square, so... Then here? Here. No, that's got to be good. Got to be good. And he can't try and play d5 and sack the knight. Because after something like take, my bishop can come to d8 and stop pawn c7. This is why bishops are typically better in position endgames with pawns on both sides of the board. So after here, the only way out is g7. His king also can't get close to my pawn for the time being. I'm stopping knight to f6. I'm stopping knight to f4. I'm stopping knight to g3. He does have knight to g7. If knight g7 and I take, then he has check. And he picks up the bishop. Okay? Ah, that's interesting. So if take, he wants to try and do this to give himself a passed pawn. That's interesting. So if take, a5. I just have king c5, though. And then if a6, I take. So that's not going to work. Too slow. Should be too slow. I think knight g7 was the way to go for white. I don't think I've handled this endgame perfectly. But hopefully this does illustrate how, like, for a starter, always fight on. People will always find a way to blunder. Looking at it from the white side. And also knights are very, very tricky. Yeah, I don't really see a good way of white dealing with this. Now my king and my bishop are far away from each other as well, which means they can't be forked. Yeah, now king here. And you just don't have time to break through because my king is too close. That's what I was calculating before. Also, white can't get the f3 pawn because the king is completely shut off. Unless he wants to come in like this, but that would take forever. Okay, now I'm going to go bishop g3 because I stopped the knight from coming up the board this way. And I also keep the king cut off. You can play knight d7 and defend the pawn, but it's not going to be good enough. I probably just go king b5 and then start pushing. The knight doesn't really have much movement either. There's no knight to e5. There's no knight to c5. There's, of course, no knight to b6. And if the knight moves, I'll just win this pawn anyway. This king still can't move. Again, illustrating the power of the bishop, keeping the king at bay and the knight at bay. And I'm not even trying to win this pawn. That's not the point. I just want to push so the king is supporting the c5 square. So yeah, this should be pretty much game over. Very interesting game. I'm really interested to see what the engine has to say about this, because definitely not 100% pleased with how I handled the endgame. But I think the opening was pretty perfect. I'd like to think. And I think the middle game was pretty good. I think we got ourselves into a very nice endgame from the middle game after the queen trade, but maybe slightly mishandled it. I do think trading the light squared bishops was the easiest way to go about the position, because the position was quite closed. I didn't think the bishop pair would be as overwhelmingly strong as it often can be. But we'll see what the computer has to say, of course. That is our silicon overlord, after all. So, okay. Hopefully my opponent makes a move. I'm going to pause the video because he may just be timing it out. Okay, so my opponent just let his time run out, which feels a bit unnecessary because I had to sit around here waiting, but whatever. It is what it is. Very interesting game, though. Let's jump into the analysis and see what it has to say. Okay, so 77.8% accuracy for my opponent, 82.1 for us. It looks like pretty much out of the opening, we had an advantage all game, except for one moment where we gave it away and then immediately got it back. So let's see what that is. That'll be interesting. So, okay, e4, c6, d4, d5, Caro Kann, knight c3 is one of the classical main. I think it's the classical main line. Whatever. Take, take, and knight to f6. And my opponent takes, which is the Tartakower. Now, one of the lines you need to be aware of is knight to g5, which is the alien gambit. And I have a few videos on my channel in the alien gambit, as well as a full guide on a system to play against the alien gambit, which I have very good success with, if you're interested. And my opponent decides to take. We take back, knight f3, bishop d6, bishop d3, and castles. And most people here castle. So like bishop g4, h3, bishop h5. And these positions are quite comfortable for black to play, because this pin is very hard for white to break, because there's no knight to bring to d2 to support the knight, or a knight to bring via f1 to g3 to kick the bishop away. So bishop e3 indicates he may be trying to castle queenside. Bishop g4 is not actually the best move. Better is the immediate knight a6. Okay. Oh, wait. I have to take... Oh, right. We're not doing this. We're actually doing this. Ah. And let's say c3. Then we don't double the pawns, and white just lost his best piece. That's interesting. I feel like I've seen that before, but I forgot about it. But bishop g4, queen d2, the computer doesn't like. Knight a6 is the best move. The point is, if white castles queenside, knight b4, and black is better. Because either he moves the bishop and loses the a2 pawn, which is not good, or he saves the a2 pawn, and then I get his best piece. Now, the reason I keep saying this bishop is his best piece is because his central structure is on the dark squares, right? And his light squared bishop is kind of like his beacon of hope around those pawns on dark squares. It also targets the weakest point in my position on h7, right? So to lose that bishop would be pretty bad. And white would lose a lot of attacking potential here. So queen d2, knight a6, c3 stops knight to b4. Queen a5 computer doesn't love, but only if white finds queen c2, targeting h7. And after a move like queen h5 defending, then he has to find knight d2. So two strange looking moves. I suppose the knight's coming to e4. I guess that's the idea, which does make sense once you see it, but moving the queen and then moving the knight just seems odd when you're thinking, well, shouldn't white just be castling? But he goes bishop e2, which felt like a big concession. The engine actually wants knight b4 here. So if take, then, you know, we just pin the queen and we win. But what's the point? Oh, knight d5. Okay, so it's basically the same as going to c7. Except there's no b4. So I played rook fe8 here. Knight c7 was also good. And my opponent castles kingside, which is a mistake, apparently. And I have one move, according to the engine, that is minus 0.5. Try and find it. I played knight c7. That was not the move. It's queen h5. Now, I couldn't figure out, after h3, take and take and take, I just wasn't impressed. But I think the point is to lift the rook. And if the knight moves, then I just mate him. Or to do this. fe1. Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So I went knight c7, which is still fine. a3. Again, I should play queen to h5, but again, I didn't realize the power of this, but good to know now. Knight d5 is still good. b4 is inaccurate because it just weakens the white position. Queen c7. My queen wants to go to c7 anyway. h3, bishop h5, rook fe1 is a mistake because of knight takes. I considered this. I saw this line, but I couldn't figure out what I do next. The engine says queen e7. Oh, right, he just can't defend the pawn. Okay, in retrospect, that looks very obvious. So let's say, I don't know, what can you even play here? Rook d1. Take, take, take. This is just abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. The game is just over. White just literally can't move. I went f5, though. Queen c1 is a miss. Bishop g5 is better. So that f4 obviously doesn't trap the bishop because the bishop is away from the pawn. But queen c1, knight e3 is the best move. So I wasn't thrilled with f4, and the engine says it's equal if I do play f4. Because now I've got to try to reroute my knight, but it's just not as effective. Bishop d1 is the best move. Let's say I go knight e4, c4, and white basically says, okay, your majority is not felt, so I'm just going to go on an attack on the queen side, which is what I was concerned about. So knight e3 is the best move, fe3. Oh, I should have thrown in bishop g3. Oh, right. And then f4. Because then I dominate the e-file, and you actually can't take because of this. Huh. Okay, so f4 is a bit inaccurate. e4 is the best move. If take, then the white position just gets completely smothered. I don't know. Here, check. Here, queen g3. I mean, everything's going to come tumbling down. Yeah, this looks pretty abysmal. I don't know, rook e6, rook g6, maybe rook e8, maybe rook h6. It looks pretty bad. So e4 means that I don't get to open up this diagonal. Bishop d3. Here, taking on e1 is the best. And trading like this is the best. Really? I thought that this was definitely not the way to go. Because opposite colored bishops. Apparently this is fine, but I have to find A5 to open up the A file. Why is this so strong? Bishop B1, A B4, A B4. King G7, King G2. These are the top moves. Rook A3, Rook C1. Queen E6. Okay. Let's see, Queen F2, stopping the infiltration. Queen E3. We're going for a queen trade. Really? Okay, this... I suppose this king actually can't move. The king literally has no squares, which is pretty funny. Let's see, what, F4... Well, yeah, this is definitely winning. Check, here, check. Here, take. E2, yeah, okay. Okay, well, that's very interesting. I went Rook E7, which is still good, but not quite as good. Rook E7, Queen E7, Queen F1, I thought was a very smart idea. Queen E3 check is the best move, but I couldn't figure out what to do next. Oh, the computer just wants to trade. But again, I thought the opposite colored bishops was a bad idea. But the engine, I think, because all these pawns are on dark squares, thinks otherwise. Because they're just very weak. Rook E8, Rook E1, Queen D7, take, Queen E2, taking is best. G5 is inaccurate. King F8 is better. I guess this pawn is just fine. But G5, King F2. F6 is the blunder. Oh, because knight E4. I was only looking for the knight moving with check, not with an attack on my bishop. So here my best move is this. And then bishop D1. And this is a draw. Ah, okay. Well, bishop C4 is not the way to go, though. This trade is very good for me. King E6, King F3. H5 is good. Knight E4, bishop E7, controlling the movement of the knight. F5 is inaccurate. Because of this? Okay, well, I disagree, because this is very easy now. Although, apparently this position is winning for white unless I find one move. There is only one move here that wins for black. Can you find the move? The move is H4. Now, why is H4 the move? Because if we do anything else, white plays H4. And destabilizes F4. If I take and take, I'm losing. Because these pawns will break through. Well, this pawn will break through at some point. And I'm going to run out of squares. My king has too many jobs. So I have to play H4 instead. And sorry, here. And then I win. Although it's still apparently not over. B6 is the best move. Okay. Well, knight C3, though. Bishop D6. Computer prefers bishop F6. Allowing this. Wait, what's wrong with King D6? Oh, C5. Okay, yeah. Because if there's C5 here, then, I don't know, maybe D6 is a problem. Oh no, the knight's hanging, though. Okay, well, no, that's fine, then. Okay, bishop D6, C5, bishop C7, A4, G4, take, F takes is best, King F2, bishop D8, computer prefers H4, B5, bishop F6, knight E2. Bishop H4 isn't actually a very good move, but here bishop G5 is the best, which I probably should have played. I think I rejected it on the basis of knight C3, bishop F6, knight back to E2, and then I should play F3. And if check here, right, then my bishop takes. Okay. And then the knight has to come via G3, but then I'm just trapping the knight. Huh. And I mean, if the knight goes to H1, then this is going to be a very easy win. But F3, GF3, GF3, knight f4, king f5 is the only move, because everything else is too passive. If I drop back, then I'm never going to get the d pawn. Take. King e4. I figured knight to g7 should be played, because if I take, then knight to f5. And technically I can still try and win this, but it's probably a draw, because the knight will find a way to blockade. Although, for example, this is the only drawing move. But after king e4, knight g7, I can just play something like bishop to... Okay, I don't understand bishop e7. What's wrong with bishop f6? No, this is fine. And then I can take with the bishop. bc6, bc6, knight g5. King f4. If check, king e5. If he goes back, then I can go f2, and then I just go get this pawn. He goes b6, though, which was interesting, but it just doesn't work. Because king d4, the point is if a5 and king to c... Wait, have I misevaluated this? This is a draw? Only if knight g7 is played. King b6. Knight f5 only move. Oh, then my bishop has to leave this the control of this square. The bishop f6, king f2, and then the knight sacks itself for this pawn, and the king wins this pawn. Wow. But knight f4 is not good. This game was definitely still alive, but here my opponent literally made me wait like 8 minutes and then abandoned the game. That's pretty poor sportsmanship, gotta say. But, yeah, I mean, this is obviously completely winning, but knights are tricky, man. Knights are tricky, but the Caro Kann is also very strong. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see another very interesting video in the Caro Kann, check out this video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.